Now that we got the grip off, our next step is equally important. You want to have a nice clean surface for your new tape. So you want to remove the tape that's on the shaft if at all possible. Most likely there's going to be some tape remaining on the shaft after the grip is removed. If you're lucky, the tape can be peeled off with very little effort. You don't want to leave old solvent-based tape on the shaft before installing new grips. For one, you can't be assured of the adhesive quality. Plus, it'll add to the size or the girth to a new grip, especially if you want to maintain a standard or undersized grip. And lastly, if the tape is partially torn or removed, the golfer, sensitive ones at least, may actually be able to feel the inconsistency underneath the grip as if there were wrinkles present. If you have my luck, you'll more commonly find the tape will be difficult to remove, especially if it's water reactivated tape. You're probably thinking, how the heck am I supposed to know the difference between water reactivated tape and solvent-based tape? Isn't all grip tape the same? Well, let me talk in depth about the different types of grip tape you may encounter. When the first slip-on grips became available in the 1950s, it became apparent that some sort of method was needed to hold the grip onto the shaft. As legend would have it, one day, one of the co-inventors tried on a new shirt where the manufacturer had used a two-sided tape to keep the collar in place. This led Golf Pride to purchase enough of this so-called miracle tape to allow the slip-on rubber grip to make its way into golf history. Since the 1950s, two-way tape was activated by pouring a harsh type of solvent which would lubricate the surface to allow the grip to slide onto the butt end of the club. To this day, this is the method by which most grips are installed, although the solvents have become much less and less harmful to the environment and to the club maker. In the 1990s, attempts by tape manufacturers to invent a tape sufficient for helping lubricate the surface and holding the grip in place without solvents was made. These water-based tapes in theory worked well, but in practice failed. Several problems existed compared to using solvents. First, water by itself didn't lubricate the surface adequately. It needed the addition of dishwashing soap. If too much soap was used, the grip would not adhere and eventually break loose. Another problem was the drying time. Solvents will flash off, or fancy way of saying evaporating, rather quickly, whereas a soapy water might take overnight to dry. In certain cases, and with certain grips, water would be trapped and not dry at all after a few days. And for club makers used to the quick drying time, water-based tape was not a transition that came easily or at all. Now, water-based, or yet more appropriately called water reactivated tape, does exist and gaining in popularity slowly but surely. Many of these tapes are still suggesting the use of a couple tablespoons of dishwashing soap per 1 quart of tap water. When I worked for Dynacraft, we had a sister division called Paljoy Golf. Some of the members of the assembly line started using undiluted glass cleaner like Windex instead of the soapy water. This was readily available and cheap and worked surprisingly well to slide the grip on. In addition, it cut the drying time significantly to almost comparable to grip solvents offered by the component suppliers. Now, it may be difficult to tell the difference between the two types of tape, but if you take a quick glance, water reactivated tape will appear more opaque and is generally thinner than solvent-based tape. And one more thing to add. Since golf club manufacturing by the major OEMs or manufacturers have gone overseas, you'll find solvent-based tape that looks just as thin and difficult to remove as water reactivated tape. I found the best way to remove the solvent-based tape is with heat. Take a heat gun and put it on the low setting. Heat the tape along the full length, making sure that you keep the heat gun moving. After about 15 seconds of heating, the adhesive on the tape should soften enough that you should be able to peel it off easily. If not, then you could try another round with the heat gun and try to peel the tape once again. You can also use a hair dryer if that's all you have available. Just don't tell your wife, girlfriend, or your daughter. Now, if it still doesn't work, this may very well be water reactivated tape, or the thin imported tape I told you about earlier. No biggie, let it cool, and you may still have a nice smooth surface from which to apply the new tape. Another method is you could scrape it off if you really want it to, which can be time-consuming in the case you have 14 clubs to do. Now, Horico does sell a tape scraper just for that purpose. Now, the rest of this webinar will explain how we put grips on brand new clubs, as the procedure is the same. I guess the first thing we should talk about is the basic supplies and tools that you're going to need. As you can see from the slide, there's not a whole lot that you need. One thing is a bench vise for securing the club, a vinyl shaft clamp to protect the shaft, calipers to measure the size of the grips and the shafts, the utility knife and the hook knife blade for removal, a runoff pan to recycle the solvent or liquid, and a heat gun for grip tape removal. And for supplies, you need the double-sided or two-way grip tape, masking tape for build-up, paper towels for cleanup, and some sort of solvent for lubrication. Now, a paint tray it will suffice for the runoff pan. And if you're using water reactivated tape, you may be able to use glass cleaner you already have at home. Now, a quick word about solvents, as there are a lot of products that could be used. Now, grip solvents by component suppliers are generally much safer than using odorless mineral spirits or naphtha. But please try not to use paint thinners. Remember that grips often have some paint fill in them. Also avoid gasoline, kerosene, or lighter fluid. Not only are these dangerous, but they're going to leave a stench on the grip that someone will have to smell until it's well aired out. Calipers are probably the only thing you won't have, but I'd still encourage you to have a set, and equally important, learn how to use them. Even if you don't have access to a pair of calipers, there's not a ton of different shaft butt sizes you're going to encounter, and you may be able to consult a catalog and look up what the butt diameter of the shaft that you have. If you do a lot of regripping, you'll occasionally get in clubs with odd-sized butt diameters that you may or may not be able to get grips for anymore. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, there were companies selling clubs with large butt shafts, some measuring as much as 1 inch in diameter. Special thin, lightweight grips were produced at the time to accommodate those shafts. Now, a good example is the Goldwin AVDP clubs. If you ever get a request to regrip a set, don't. Just politely tell your customer they no longer make a replacement grip. It's better than taking the knife and cutting off a grip than having to tell your customer after the fact that he's going to have a much more costly reshaft to do if he wants to use those same clubs. I said there were some basic items, but for those thinking of doing a lot of volume regripping golf clubs, you may find some additional items